It was well past midnight, and the streetlights flickered dimly in the quiet neighborhood. The sound of crickets filled the air, but inside the small, dimly lit apartment, everything was eerily silent. Zara stood outside the house, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone would hear it. Her hands were trembling, and her breath was uneven. She checked the time on her phone, 2:43 a.m. She had been standing there for nearly 15 minutes, trying to gather the courage to move. The house looked ordinary, but she knew the danger inside was anything but. She hadn't planned for things to end up like this. It started with a simple conversation, a chance encounter at a coffee shop just a few weeks ago. That's where she first met Adeel. He seemed normal, friendly, polite, and maybe a little too reserved. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. There was something hidden there, something that made her curious. Over time, as they started talking, Zara learned more about his life, or rather, what little he was willing to share. He had no family nearby, no close friends, and seemed to always be looking over his shoulder. She didn't press him for details, but the more she got to know him, the more she sensed that something wasn't right. It wasn't until 3 days ago that everything changed. Adeel had sent her a voice message late at night. His voice was shaky, and he spoke in a whisper. "Zara, I think someone's following me. I need help. Please." That was it. No explanation, no follow-up message. She tried calling him back, but there was no answer. She waited, panicked, hoping he'd respond, but the silence was unbearable. She barely slept that night, and by morning, she decided she couldn't wait any longer. She had to find out what was happening. That's what brought her here, outside his house in the dead of night, debating whether she should knock on the door or find another way inside. Her instincts told her that knocking wouldn't work. If he was in trouble, announcing her presence might make things worse. She tried the front door, but it was locked. Her pulse quickened as she crept around the back, hoping to find another way in. The back window was slightly open. She hesitated, her mind racing with questions. Was she overreacting? Was this all a misunderstanding? But the memory of his voice, trembling with fear, pushed her forward. She carefully slid the window open and climbed inside, landing softly in what appeared to be the kitchen. The room was dark, but the faint glow of the streetlights through the blinds gave her just enough visibility. She moved cautiously, her footsteps barely making a sound. The house felt cold, and there was an unsettling stillness that made her skin crawl. She called out his name in a whisper. "Adeel?" No response. She moved deeper into the house, checking each room one by one. It wasn't until she reached the living room that she saw it, a broken glass on the floor, a trail of blood leading toward the bedroom. Her stomach dropped. Zara's breathing quickened as she followed the trail. The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open slowly. What she saw made her freeze. Adeel was tied to a chair, his head hanging forward, and his shirt stained with blood. A masked man stood beside him, holding a knife. The man turned sharply when he heard the door creak, and for a moment, Zara felt like her legs would give out. But then she saw the fear in Adeel's eyes, and something inside her snapped. She couldn't let this happen. She grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp from a side table, and lunged at the man. The sound of the crash echoed through the room as the lamp shattered against the attacker's arm. He stumbled back, cursing, and Zara used the moment to untie Adeel. His hands were shaky, but he managed to help her as they both tried to fight off the man. The struggle was intense, but together they managed to push him out of the room and lock the door. They didn't stop moving. Zara grabbed Adeel's arm and pulled him toward the back window where she had entered. They climbed out as fast as they could and ran down the street, not stopping until they reached a nearby gas station. Adeel was still trembling, but Zara kept him steady. She called the police, and within minutes, officers arrived. They took statements, and Adeel was taken to the hospital for his injuries. As he sat in the hospital bed, finally safe, Zara couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and fear. "How did you know to come?" Adeel asked, his voice weak but grateful. Zara smiled faintly. "You asked for help. I wasn't going to ignore that." The police later informed them that the man had been caught. He had been stalking Adeel for weeks, looking for an opportunity to rob him. It wasn't random. Adeel had unknowingly crossed paths with the man during a late-night run to the store, and that encounter had spiraled into a nightmare. Zara stayed by his side through it all, refusing to leave until she knew he was completely safe. As she sat there, holding his hand, she realized how much had changed in such a short time. What started as a casual friendship had turned into something deeper, something unbreakable. Adeel looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, something unspoken. "I owe you my life," he said softly. Zara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me you'll be more careful next time." He nodded, and for the first time in days, a small smile appeared on his face. The danger was over, but their story was just beginning.